There's a strange kind of power that almost nobody notices at first. It doesn't speak loudly. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't try to prove itself. And yet, when this person walks into a room, people feel it immediately. Not because they are dominant. Not because they are famous. But because they are completely unshaken by the need to be seen. Most people spend their lives trying to become important through noise. Talking more. Explaining more. Showing more. Performing more. But the truly powerful person learns something dangerous. The moment you stop needing validation, your presence changes completely. If you've ever felt invisible in a group, ignored while louder people dominated conversations, or secretly exhausted from trying to be understood, then maybe what you've been searching for was never confidence. Maybe it was inner authority. And inner authority is silent. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people think power comes from controlling others. But psychologically, that's usually compensation. A reaction to inner weakness. An attempt to fill a silent emptiness with external control. Real power begins the moment you no longer need to force reality to confirm your worth. And modern society teaches the exact opposite. From childhood, people are conditioned to chase visibility. To market themselves constantly. To become emotionally dependent on reactions. Likes. Attention. Approval. Recognition. The world rewards performance so aggressively that many people never develop a real self underneath it. They become experts at appearing confident while internally terrified of rejection. And this creates a strange psychological prison. Because when your identity depends on how people respond to you, you lose your freedom the moment someone withdraws attention. That is why so many people speak too much. Explain too much. Defend themselves too quickly. Silence becomes unbearable when a person is disconnected from themselves. But silence becomes magnetic when a person finally becomes whole. You can feel this difference immediately. Some people enter a room desperately trying to be liked. Others enter already accepting themselves. The second person changes the emotional atmosphere without effort. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." What he understood was that inner certainty creates emotional gravity. People are unconsciously drawn toward those who are not psychologically begging for approval. And yet this truth is uncomfortable because it forces a deeper realization. Most human behavior is negotiation for worth. People overtalk because they fear invisibility. People chase because they fear abandonment. People perform because they fear silence exposing who they really are. But the powerful person has already faced that silence. That is the difference. Late at night, when nobody is around, when distractions disappear, most people encounter themselves for the first time. And many discover a frightening emptiness underneath the personality they present to the world. That emptiness is what drives unconscious behavior. Carl Jung called this the shadow. Not evil, but the hidden self we avoid confronting. The insecure parts. The needy parts. The terrified parts. The wounded child still trying to earn love. Most people spend their lives running from this inner fragmentation. But power begins when you stop running. Because the person who accepts themselves completely becomes psychologically untouchable. Not arrogant. Not emotionless. Not cold. Just deeply rooted. And rooted people do not chase validation like starving souls. You've probably seen this without realizing it. A quiet person sitting in a group. Not forcing conversation. Not competing for attention. Yet somehow everyone keeps noticing them. Why? Because calmness in a chaotic world feels rare. Stillness has become unusual. And whatever becomes rare becomes powerful. Modern culture rewards stimulation. Speed. Reaction. constant emotional broadcasting. But psychologically, people trust emotional stability more than emotional intensity. The loudest person in the room often has the weakest center. Because people who constantly need to dominate conversations are often fighting an invisible fear of being irrelevant. The powerful person no longer fights that war internally. That is why they can remain calm. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." This is where the transformation begins. The first shift is learning emotional restraint. Not suppression. Restraint. There's a difference. Suppression hides emotion. Restraint understands emotion without becoming controlled by it. Most people react instantly to discomfort. They explain themselves impulsively. Defend themselves emotionally. Seek reassurance immediately. But emotional impulsiveness reveals dependency. The more desperately you need to control perception, the less power you actually possess. The silent person observes first. They allow tension to exist without panicking. And this creates an unusual psychological effect: people begin projecting confidence onto them automatically. Because calmness suggests inner security. Imagine being ignored during a conversation. Most people immediately feel invisible. Their energy collapses internally. They begin trying harder to regain attention. But the powerful person notices the feeling, without surrendering to it. That single moment changes everything. Because self-worth that depends on external acknowledgement is fragile by nature. And fragile people become emotionally loud. The second shift is detachment from outcome. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to life. It means no longer attaching your identity to whether people choose you, approve of you, or understand you. And this is difficult because humans deeply fear rejection. Not being chosen triggers something ancient inside us. But psychologically mature people realize something most never understand. Rejection often reveals incompatibility, not inadequacy. The moment you stop interpreting every social experience as a measurement of your worth, you recover enormous psychological energy. And people feel that energy immediately. There is something deeply attractive about someone who does not need anything from you emotionally. Not because they are cold, but because they are complete enough to stand alone. Jung believed the goal of life was individuation. The process of becoming fully yourself rather than a reflection of collective expectations. But individuation is painful. Because becoming yourself requires disappointing people who benefited from your performance. The moment you stop over-explaining, some people will call you distant. The moment you stop chasing, some people will accuse you of changing. The moment you stop performing emotionally, people accustomed to controlling you may become uncomfortable. But transformation always disrupts old dynamics. A person discovering their inner authority becomes harder to manipulate. And manipulation often depends on emotional hunger. The less desperate you are for approval, the less power others have over your emotional state. This is why silence can become terrifyingly powerful. Not performative silence. Not fake mystery. But the silence of someone who no longer needs constant external confirmation to feel real. There's a moment many people experience during deep personal change. Usually alone. Usually at night. You sit quietly after emotional exhaustion finally catches up with you. And suddenly you realize how much of your life was spent trying to earn permission to exist confidently. Permission from parents. From relationships. From society. From strangers. And something inside you begins breaking. Not in a destructive way. In a liberating way. You realize nobody was ever going to arrive and declare you worthy. You have to decide that yourself. And that realization changes the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you enter rooms. Because self-respect creates a kind of invisible architecture around a person. People can feel it before words are spoken. The third shift is becoming comfortable with solitude. Most people cannot hear themselves clearly because they are constantly surrounded by noise. Entertainment. Notifications. Conversations. Distractions. Solitude forces confrontation with the self. And many avoid it because unresolved emotions begin surfacing immediately. But the powerful person learns to sit alone without escaping themselves. This creates depth. And depth changes presence. A shallow person seeks stimulation constantly. A deep person becomes selective with energy. That selectiveness appears as quiet confidence externally. Nietzsche wrote, "To become who you are." Simple words. But psychologically brutal. Because becoming who you are means removing everything false. The masks. The social performances. The exaggerated personality traits designed for acceptance. And what remains afterward is often quieter than before. But infinitely more powerful. The final shift is perhaps the hardest. Letting go of the need to be understood by everyone. This is where many people remain trapped emotionally. They spend years explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. But maturity reveals something painful. Not everyone has the capacity to meet you deeply. And chasing universal understanding destroys inner peace. The powerful person learns discernment. They stop forcing connection where alignment does not exist. And strangely, this increases their presence even more. Because nothing is more exhausting than someone trying desperately to convince the world of their value. True value does not announce itself constantly. It reveals itself naturally through stability, integrity, and emotional composure. There is a reason certain people remain unforgettable despite saying very little. Their energy is not fragmented. Their mind is not begging for approval every second. They are internally aligned. And alignment creates presence. Near the end of life, almost nobody regrets being less impressive. But many regret abandoning themselves for acceptance. That is the existential tragedy of modern identity. People become strangers to themselves while trying to become visible to others. But eventually, after enough disappointment, enough rejection, enough emotional exhaustion, some people awaken. And they realize power was never about dominance. It was about self-possession. The ability to remain connected to yourself in a world constantly trying to pull you outward. To sit calmly inside your own mind. To stop negotiating your worth. To stop performing for survival. To stop chasing emotional permission. Because the strongest person in the room is rarely the loudest. Usually, they are the most internally free. And freedom has a presence words cannot imitate. In the end, becoming powerful without saying a word is not about manipulation. It is about becoming psychologically whole. When you no longer abandon yourself to gain approval, people feel the difference immediately. You stop forcing. You stop chasing. You stop shrinking yourself for comfort. You simply become. And strangely, that is when your presence begins speaking for you. Because true power is not loud. It is grounded. It is calm. It is the quiet certainty of someone who finally knows who they are. And once a person reaches that state, silence itself becomes authority. If this spoke to something deep inside you, subscribe for more psychological explorations like this. Share this with someone quietly rebuilding themselves. And return again, when the world becomes too loud and you need to remember who you are beneath the noise.